I am Kiara, 32 years old, and somehow still healing from the wounds my own parents and sister inflicted on me. For years, they mocked my dark skin, my natural hair, and my clothes, branding me the thrift store girl, while treating my light-skinned sister like absolute royalty. Last Easter, during our family dinner, my entitled sister dug through my worn-out bag and discovered my hidden $6 million net worth. When my parents demanded I hand every penny over to her white husband, I simply laughed, picked up my things, and slammed their heavy oak door forever. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who completely underestimated your true worth. The smell of honey-baked ham and expensive perfume hit me the second I walked into my parents' immaculate Atlanta home. It was Easter Sunday, a day supposedly meant for grace and gratitude, but in my family it was just another stage for their performative wealth. I had barely taken off my coat when my older sister Dominique practically glided into the foyer. She wore a silk designer dress that clung perfectly to her frame, her flawlessly straightened hair bouncing as she stopped to look me up and down. A familiar smirk spread across her face. "You actually wore that outside the house, Kiara." She let out a sharp laugh, her eyes scanning my simple linen dress. "I see you are still embracing the thrift store girl aesthetic. Could you not find anything from this current decade?" I took a deep breath, choosing not to take the bait. "It is a vintage piece, Dominique," I said quietly, moving past her toward the dining room. "Happy Easter to you too." But Dominique was never one to let a moment of humiliation slip by. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging slightly into my skin. She thrust a damp gray microfiber cloth into my hand. "Do me a favor and wipe down the baseboards in the dining room before you sit down. Trent hates dust, and his allergies are acting up today. We cannot have his sinuses ruined because you tracked in whatever dirt was on those cheap shoes." I stared at the damp rag in my hand. Trent was her white husband, a finance bro who strutted around our family gatherings acting like he owned the place. My parents worshipped him because he represented the proximity to whiteness and wealth they desperately craved. Instead of causing a scene that would only end with my parents calling me angry and bitter, I silently took the rag. I knelt down near the dining table and began wiping the spotless mahogany trim, swallowing the massive lump of humiliation in my throat. My mother Valerie walked into the room carrying a crystal tray of deviled eggs. She stepped right over me, not even acknowledging my presence on the floor, and immediately beamed at Dominique. "Oh, sweetheart, that color looks absolutely divine on you," my mother cooed, adjusting the collar of her dress. "It really brings out your bright complexion. You always had the perfect skin tone for pastels. Not like Kiara." My mother shot a disdainful glance down at me. "Kiara, you really should avoid wearing mustard yellow. It makes your dark skin look entirely too dull. And what is going on with your hair today? I told you to go to my stylist and get it relaxed for the holiday. You look completely unkempt." My natural coils were neatly styled, but to my mother, anything that did not mimic European beauty standards was simply unacceptable. My father Marcus entered the room next, clapping Trent on the shoulder as they walked to the head of the table. "That is right, Kiara," my father chimed in, taking his seat. "You need to start presenting yourself better. Dominique and Trent are moving up in the world, meeting important investors. We cannot have you looking like you just rolled out of a community center when they host events. Perception is reality in this family." I scrubbed the baseboard a little harder, my jaw clenched tight. The microaggressions were not new. My entire life I was the scapegoat, the dark-skinned daughter who never quite fit into their bougie country club aesthetic. They assumed because I drove an older car, wore thrifted clothes, and worked quietly on my laptop every day that I was a broke freelancer, barely scraping by. They thought I was a complete failure. What they did not know was that my clothes were a choice, not a necessity. They did not know I was a wealthy tech founder holding a $6 million secret. I took my seat at the far end of the long mahogany table right next to the kitchen door. It was the unspoken assigned seat for the family disappointment. As my mother passed the crystal bowl of mashed potatoes, Trent cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair. He unbuttoned his custom-tailored suit jacket and steepled his fingers, a gesture he probably practiced in the mirror to look authoritative. Well, Marcus Trent began projecting his voice so it echoed off the dining room walls. I wanted to wait until dessert, but I just cannot keep this under wraps anymore. I am looking at a massive acquisition in the South Atlanta corridor. It is a prime opportunity zone. We are talking high-yield cap rates and an ROI that will absolutely disrupt the local commercial market. It is a multi-million-dollar play, and I have the inside track before it even hits the public listings. My father leaned forward, his eyes wide with admiration. Is that right, son? South Atlanta is gentrifying fast. What kind of property are we talking about here? Trent took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine, relishing the attention. It is a large tract of industrial land perfectly zoned for a luxury mixed-use development. High-end condos on top, artisan coffee shops, and boutique retail on the bottom. The sellers are completely clueless about the gold mine they are sitting on. They are practically giving it away. I already have the zoning board eating out of the palm of my hand. The only minor hurdle is securing the initial seed capital to lock in the escrow by next week. The banks are moving too slow, and I cannot risk another developer swooping in. My mother gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. Oh, Trent, that sounds incredibly exciting. Dominique, you must be so proud of your husband. He is building a real empire for your future. Dominique smiled, her teeth gleaming white against her bright lipstick. I am Mom. Trent works so hard for our family. Our family. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Trent looked directly at my father, playing his final manipulative card. Marcus, I am telling you this because I want to keep the wealth inside the family. I need a quiet investor to front the $500,000 seed money. In exchange, I am willing to offer a 10% equity stake. It is a guaranteed win. I would rather make you and Valerie richer than hand those profits over to a faceless bank. My father did not even hesitate. He did not ask to see a prospectus. He did not ask for a risk assessment. He just nodded vigorously, his chest puffed out with pride. You can count us in, Trent. Valerie and I have some liquid assets we can move around. This is exactly the kind of legacy building I have always talked about. Generational wealth is built on smart, aggressive moves. My mother clapped her hands together, thrilled by the idea of bragging to her country club friends about her son-in-law, the real estate mogul. She then turned her gaze down the table, landing squarely on me. Her warm smile instantly vanished, replaced by a scowl of deep disappointment. You should take notes, Kiara. My mother snapped, her voice cutting through the celebratory mood. This is what real ambition looks like. Trent is out here securing our family legacy, while you are still playing on your little laptop all day. When was the last time you actually brought a real paycheck into this house? I kept my eyes on my plate, cutting a small piece of ham. I am doing just fine, Mom, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly even. My freelance business is stable. Stable, my father scoffed, waving his fork in the air. Stable is just another word for stagnant. You are 32 years old, Kiara. You have no husband, no property, and no real career. You spend your weekends digging through thrift store bins while your sister is helping build a real estate empire. It is embarrassing. Do you know what the pastor asked me last Sunday? He asked if you needed financial assistance from the church charity fund because of how you were dressed. Dominique let out a cruel little laugh. Oh my gosh, Dad, that is so humiliating. You really should give her a job at your new development, Trent. Maybe she can pick up the trash on the construction site. Trent chuckled, shaking his head condescendingly. I would, Dominique, but I only hire professionals. No offense, Kiara, but real estate requires a certain level of sophistication and hustle. It is not exactly a work-from-home in your pajamas kind of industry. You just do not have the right mindset for high-level business. I chewed my food slowly, letting their insults wash over me. The irony was so thick it was almost choking me. Trent was bragging about buying a piece of industrial land in South Atlanta from a clueless seller. What this arrogant white savior did not realize was that the prime real estate he was desperately trying to acquire was an abandoned chemical dumping ground. And more importantly, he did not realize that the anonymous seller holding the deed to that exact property was me. I wiped my mouth with a napkin and stood up calmly. "I need to check on the dessert," I said, excusing myself from the table. As I walked away, I left my worn-out tote bag slung over the back of my chair. It was a simple mistake, but one that was about to set the entire room on fire. The heavy swinging door of the kitchen closed behind me, cutting off the sound of my father laughing at whatever arrogant joke Trent had just made. I leaned against the cool granite counter and let out a long, slow breath. The kitchen was my only temporary sanctuary in this massive, suffocating house. I walked over to the oven and pulled out the peach cobbler I had spent 3 hours making from scratch. The sweet smell of cinnamon and brown sugar immediately filled the air, but it did absolutely nothing to settle the tight knot of frustration in my stomach. I carefully began scooping the warm cobbler into my mother's expensive crystal dessert bowls. Through the thick wooden door, I could still hear the muffled sounds of clinking wine glasses and Trent loudly boasting about his brilliant business acumen. I shook my head, grabbing a can of whipped cream. Let them have their little moment of superiority, I thought to myself. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with or what I actually did for a living. I was not just some broke freelancer typing aimlessly on a laptop. Over the last 6 years, I had built a green technology firm from the ground up from my apartment. I secured patents, I won government contracts, and I kept it all entirely hidden from my family because I knew exactly how they would react. I finished plating the last bowl of cobbler and pushed the kitchen door open just a tiny crack, intending to ask my father if he wanted coffee. That is when I saw it. I stopped dead in my tracks. Dominique was standing right behind my empty chair. She held a gold compact mirror in one hand and was aggressively digging through my worn canvas tote bag with her other hand. I froze completely, watching the scene unfold through the narrow gap in the doorway. Dominique scoffed loudly, complaining to my mother across the room. "I cannot believe Kiara actually carries this filthy rag around in public. I just need a simple tube of lip gloss, and all she has in here is junk. It is like a bottomless pit of depression." Valerie laughed softly, taking a delicate sip of her red wine. "Do not touch her things too much, Dominique. You might catch poverty. Just wash your hands before you eat dessert." Trent chuckled from the head of the table. "Come on, babe, leave the thrift store girl alone." If she had any money for makeup, she would not be wearing a dress from the clearance rack. Dominique ignored them, pushing aside my bulky laptop charger, my plain leather wallet, and a stack of business cards I had shoved out of sight. Her manicured fingers suddenly grabbed hold of something thick and heavy at the very bottom of the bag. It was not lip gloss. It was the thick manila folder I had just picked up from my corporate lawyer's office earlier that exact morning. I watched, holding my breath, as she pulled the heavy folder out into the bright light of the dining room chandelier. Across the front, in bold red ink, was a stamp that read, "Strictly confidential." Anyone with even an ounce of common decency or respect for personal boundaries would have shoved it right back into the bag. But Dominique was a spoiled, entitled golden child who believed everything in this world, including my personal privacy, belonged to her. She flipped the folder open right there in the middle of the dining room, leaning against my chair. At first, her face showed pure confusion. Her eyes scanned the dense legal jargon printed at the very top of the first page. I knew exactly what her eyes were desperately trying to process. It was the formal acquisition agreement for Eco Waste Tech. Dominique flipped to the second page, her perfectly shaped brow furrowing deeply. "What is she reading?" Trent asked, noticing his wife's sudden change in demeanor. Dominique did not answer him. She just flipped quickly to the third page, which contained the final financial summary and the execution clauses. I watched from the dark shadows of the kitchen as all the color completely drained from her flawless face. Her mouth fell open in shock. Her eyes locked onto the bolded text at the very bottom of the signature page. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear her vision, refusing to believe the numbers printed in black and white. $6 million. Net payout. paid in full upon signing to the sole managing member and founder Kiara. She stood there completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the wealth she was staring at. The sister she had spent her entire life mocking was a secret multimillionaire. The room went dead silent. Dominique snatched the folder from the back of my chair and marched straight into the dining room. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor, shattering the brief silence. She did not even look at me. She marched right past the kitchen door and slammed the thick manila folder down right in the center of the dining table. It landed with a heavy thud right next to the crystal butter dish. Trent jumped slightly, his wineglass sloshing over the rim. "What is your problem today, Dominique?" he snapped, wiping a drop of red wine from his custom suit lapel. Dominique pointed a shaking finger at the document. "Read it," she demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and absolute rage. "Read the bottom line, Trent?" Trent let out an annoyed sigh and pulled the folder toward him. My father leaned over, adjusting his reading glasses. My mother scoffed, waving her hand. "Dominique, whatever little piece of junk mail your sister left lying around cannot possibly be that important. We are discussing real business here." But Trent was no longer listening to my mother. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, his pupils dilating rapidly as he processed everything. He flipped to the signature page. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "What is it, Trent?" my father asked, his tone shifting from dismissive to concerned. Trent slowly looked up from the paper. He stared directly at the kitchen door, where I was standing half hidden in the shadows. He swallowed hard. "It is an acquisition agreement," he whispered, his voice barely carrying over the smooth jazz playing on the stereo. "Kiara just sold a tech company called Eco Waste Tech. She is the sole founder. The buyout is cash, $6 million net." My mother dropped her silver fork. It clattered loudly against her china plate. $6 million, she repeated the words, sounding foreign on her tongue. "That is impossible. Kiara sells junk on the internet. She is broke." I finally pushed the kitchen door open and stepped fully into the dining room. "I am not broke, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "I run an environmental tech firm. I just closed the deal this morning." The room erupted. But it was not an eruption of joy or pride. Nobody stood up to hug me. Nobody told me they were proud of my hard work. Instead, a terrifying feral energy took over the room. The mask of polite Southern wealth instantly melted away, revealing pure, unadulterated greed. Trent was the first to pivot. He slammed his hand on the table, his eyes gleaming with a sudden manic desperation. "This is perfect," he declared, standing up from his chair. "This is exactly what we need. Kiara, you have to wire that money into my escrow account first thing tomorrow morning. With $6 million, we do not even need the bank loan anymore. I can buy the South Atlanta property outright in cash, and we can start development immediately." I stared at him, completely baffled by his sheer audacity. "You want me to give you my company buyout money?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. My father stood up, pointing a stern finger at me. "Do not take that tone with your brother Kiara. Trent is offering you a chance to be part of a real legacy. You are going to transfer those funds to him. It is the only logical move. You do not know the first thing about managing that kind of wealth. Trent is a financial expert. He will handle the investments for the family." Family. I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. "You mean you want me to fund his delusions of grandeur?" Dominique slammed her hands on the table, her face twisted in ugly jealousy. "How dare you keep this from us?" she shrieked. "You sat there letting us pay for your meals, letting us worry about you while you were sitting on millions. You selfish little brat." My mother pushed her chair back violently and marched toward me, her eyes blazing. "You owe this family, Kiara," she screamed, her face inches from mine. "We gave you a roof. We clothed you. We fed you. You will do exactly as Trent says, or you are no longer a part of this family." I looked at the red faces surrounding me. The entitlement was sickening. A cold, chilling laugh bubbled up from my chest, cutting through their demands. I walked right past my screaming mother, reached over the table, and snatched my folder out of Trent's hands. "You people are absolutely out of your minds," I said softly. I turned right around, walked out, and slammed the heavy oak door, shutting them all out of my life for good. The morning sun barely filtered through the cheap Venetian blinds of my decoy apartment. I lived in a massive penthouse downtown, but I kept this rundown one-bedroom unit in a sketchy neighborhood specifically for my family. It was my designated mailing address for them, and the only place they thought I lived. I was sitting on a second-hand sofa, sipping my coffee and reviewing the final wire transfer protocols for my $6 million buyout when the aggressive pounding started. It was not a polite knock. It was the frantic, entitled hammering of people who believed they owned whatever was on the other side of the door. The sheer force of it rattled the cheap hinges. "Open this door right now, Kiara," my mother's voice echoed sharply through the narrow, poorly lit hallway. "We know you are in there. Do not play games with us." I set my coffee mug down and walked quietly to the door, pressing my eye against the peephole. There they were in all their Sunday best glory, standing in the middle of a dingy apartment complex hallway on a Monday morning. My mother Valerie was gripping her designer handbag like a weapon. My father Marcus stood behind her, his face red with a mix of exhaustion and absolute fury. And right beside them was Dominique, looking utterly disgusted by the cheap carpeting beneath her expensive heels. "You cannot just walk out of Easter dinner and ignore us," my father bellowed, slapping his flat palm against the cheap wood. "You are acting like a petulant child. We are your family. We are here to discuss the transfer of those funds to Trent's account. He already called the broker and told them the seed money is secured." I leaned against the door, my arms crossed, refusing to say a single word. My silence only infuriated them more. "Stop hiding, you ungrateful brat!" Dominique shrieked, her voice pitching up into a hysterical octave. "Do you have any idea how embarrassed Trent was last night? He is trying to build a real estate empire for us, and you are sitting on millions of dollars like a greedy little dragon. Open the door and give us what belongs to this family." Their voices were so loud that I could hear the distinct sound of deadbolts turning down the hall. My neighbors in this building were hardworking people who worked night shifts and held down multiple jobs. They did not take kindly to rich snobs screaming in their hallway at 8 in the morning. Mrs. Hernandez from apartment 4B cracked her door open, peering out with a scowl. My mother noticed the neighbor, but instead of lowering her voice, she weaponized the audience. She turned her body slightly, making sure her voice carried down the entire corridor. "That is right, everybody," my mother announced, waving her hand dramatically. "My daughter is a selfish liar. She has millions of dollars hidden away while she lives in this filthy building pretending to be poor. We clothed her and fed her and gave her everything, and now she refuses to help her own brother-in-law with a simple business loan. She is a complete disgrace." The manipulation was astounding. She actually thought public shaming in a rundown apartment building would force me to open the door and write a $6 million check. She thought I would crumble under the weight of her disappointment just like I did when I was a teenager. What she did not realize was that the teenage girl, desperate for her mother's approval, had died a long time ago. The woman standing on the other side of the door was a corporate CEO who regularly negotiated with cutthroat tech billionaires. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the camera app, and hit record, capturing the crystal clear audio of their unhinged screaming through the thin door. "If you do not open this door right now, Kiara," my father shouted, his voice turning dark and threatening, "we will drag you to court. We will sue you for everything you have. We paid for your life, and we own a piece of whatever company you just sold. You owe us." I stopped recording, saved the audio file, and finally unlocked the deadbolt. The heavy click echoed in the hallway. I pulled the door open just a few inches, keeping the chain lock securely fastened. I looked at their angry, expectant faces. "You do not own anything," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper. "And if you ever show up at my door screaming again, I will have you all arrested for trespassing. Get off my property." Before they could even form a response, I slammed the door in their faces and locked it tight. The ambush had failed. But I knew this was only the beginning of their desperation. The pounding resumed, shaking the walls of the tiny apartment. To avoid a scene, I aggressively yanked the door open and stepped back. "Get inside before you get us all arrested," I hissed. They pushed past me into the cramped living room, looking around with absolute disgust at the second-hand furniture. I slammed the heavy door shut, crossing my arms tightly over my chest. Valerie did not waste a single second. She shifted her strategy to severe emotional manipulation. She carefully placed her designer bag on the cheap coffee table and looked at me with tears welling up in her eyes. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Kiara, how can you be so cold to the people who gave you life?" she whispered, her voice trembling perfectly. "We sacrificed everything to raise you in a good neighborhood, to give you a respectable name. And this is how you repay us. By hoarding wealth while your family struggles to build a legacy." I stared at her, completely unfazed by the fake tears. "You live in a fully paid-off luxury home?" "Mom," I replied evenly. "You are not struggling." My father stepped forward, his face red with righteous indignation. "That is not the point," he barked. "Family wealth belongs to the family. We invested in you. Do you think you built that company all by yourself? You used our resources." Valerie nodded vigorously, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. "Exactly, Kiara," she said, stepping closer. "Do you remember when you graduated high school? We gave you $500 as a graduation gift. You told us you were going to use it to buy a new laptop for your little coding projects." I looked at her, completely baffled by where this was going. "I was 18 years old," I stated flatly. "It was a graduation gift." "No, it was seed money," my mother corrected, her tone suddenly turning sharp and businesslike. "We provided the initial capital for your tech ventures. Without that $500, you never would have bought the computer that started your business. Legally and morally, we are entitled to a return on our investment. In fact, any decent lawyer would agree that we hold at least a 50% equity stake in your company. You owe us half of that $6 million, Kiara. It is only fair." The sheer delusion of her statement was almost impressive. She genuinely believed that a $500 gift from 14 years ago entitled her to $3 million today. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I just let her keep digging her own moral grave. Seeing that the financial threat was not breaking me, Dominique decided it was her turn to attack. She collapsed onto my cheap sofa, burying her face in her hands, and began sobbing loudly. It was not the elegant crying she usually performed for the church choir. It was loud, obnoxious wailing. "You are ruining my life, Kiara," she cried, looking up at me with mascara-smudged eyes. "Trent has been working day and night on this South Atlanta deal. The stress is literally destroying him. If he does not secure this land by next week, he is going to lose his job at the bank." She stood up and grabbed my arms, her nails digging into my skin. "He needs this win," Dominique pleaded, her voice cracking. "Our marriage is hanging by a thread because of the financial pressure. You have the power to save my marriage, Kiara. You have millions of dollars just sitting there doing nothing. If you do not give Trent this money, he might leave me. Do you want your only sister to end up divorced and broken? Are you really that evil?" I looked down at her hands, gripping my arms. I slowly reached over and peeled her fingers off me one by one. "I am not responsible for your husband's career choices, Dominique," I said, my voice ice cold. "And I am certainly not responsible for keeping your marriage together by paying a $6 million ransom." My father threw his hands up in disgust. "You are a monster, Kiara," he spat. "You are a greedy, selfish monster who cares about no one but herself. We are giving you one last chance to do the right thing and wire that money today." I walked over to the front door and pulled it open, gesturing toward the hallway. "I think this reunion is over," I said, staring at them with zero emotion. The emotional guilt trip had failed completely. I watched as they angrily stormed out, muttering dark curses under their breath. They thought they were leaving empty-handed, but they had no idea I was already setting the perfect trap. I locked the deadbolt and walked into the kitchen to pour my coffee down the sink. My phone buzzed on the counter with an urgent text message. It was an automated alert from a bank where I kept a small personal account for everyday expenses. The message stated that my account had been flagged for suspicious activity and was immediately frozen. I frowned, tapping the screen to log into the app. Sure enough, a bright red banner across the top confirmed a total freeze had been placed on my credit line. I knew I had not made any unusual purchases recently. Before I could call customer service, my phone rang loudly. The caller ID flashed with Trent's name. A cold realization washed over me instantly. Trent was a vice president of commercial lending at that exact same regional bank. I swiped the screen to answer, placing the phone on speaker. "Hello, Trent," I said, my voice perfectly neutral. I heard him chuckle on the other end. The sound was thick with unearned arrogance. "Good morning, Kiara," he said smoothly. "I assume you just received the notification about your credit card. I thought we should have a little chat about how the financial world actually works when you decide to disrespect your elders and ignore your own relatives. Are you openly admitting to committing bank fraud?" Trent, I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Because freezing a personal account without probable cause just to settle a petty family dispute is highly illegal and a violation of federal banking regulations." Trent laughed again, a harsh grating sound. "Oh please, Kiara, do not try to play lawyer with me. I am a senior executive. I flagged your account for a routine security review. It is perfectly legal, and it can take weeks or months to resolve if I do not personally expedite the paperwork. I have friends in the fraud department who owe me favors. I can make sure your credit score tanks so hard you will not be able to rent a car, let alone start another business. You are powerless here." I remained completely silent, letting him expose the full extent of his profound delusion and massive ego. "You see, Kiara, you might have gotten lucky with a little tech buyout, but you are completely out of your depth in the real world of high-stakes finance." Trent continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "Wealth requires structure and discipline. It requires submitting to the family hierarchy. Marcus and Valerie built this family, and I am taking it to the next level. You are just a glitch in our system. You need to learn your place. You are going to transfer that $6 million to my escrow account by tomorrow afternoon, or I will flag every financial institution attached to your social security number. I will ruin your reputation before you even enjoy that money. You will be back to digging in thrift store bins, begging us for a handout." The sheer audacity of this mediocre white man threatening a self-made millionaire using his mid-level corporate position was almost comical. He truly believed he held all the power. He thought I was a naive little girl who would panic at the sight of a frozen credit card. He had absolutely no idea that my primary wealth was managed by a private wealth firm in New York, or that my $6 million buyout was sitting safely in an offshore holding account he could never even dream of touching. His threat was empty, but the malicious intent behind it was crystal clear. He wanted to break me. "Is that your final offer, Trent?" I asked, keeping my voice deliberately soft and submissive to feed his fragile ego. "It is not an offer, Kiara. It is a demand," Trent snapped impatiently. "Do the right thing for once in your life, save your sister from a miserable life, and save yourself from a ruined credit score. I expect the wire confirmation by 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon." He hung up the phone without waiting for a reply. I stared at the dark screen of my phone. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. I was infuriated, but I did not yell. I did not throw things. Anger is a wasted emotion when you have the resources to orchestrate absolute destruction. Trent wanted to play dirty with financial institutions. He wanted to use his perceived power to crush me into submission. He handed me the moral justification to utterly annihilate his entire life. I picked up my phone and dialed the private number of my corporate attorney. It was time to accelerate the South Atlanta property trap. I was going to let Trent buy that toxic wasteland and watch him drown in his greed. I grabbed my car keys and walked out of the decoy apartment, leaving the cheap furniture and the suffocating memories behind. Soon I was sitting in the sleek glass-walled conference room of an elite downtown Atlanta law firm. Across the polished marble table sat my lead corporate attorney, Maxine. Maxine was a formidable black woman with razor-sharp instincts, a flawless suit, and a reputation for financially eviscerating anyone who crossed her clients. She had guided me through the $6 million acquisition of Eco Waste Tech, and she knew every single detail of my asset portfolio. I poured myself a glass of water and looked at her. Maxine, we need to talk about the South Atlanta parcel, I said, leaning back in the plush leather chair. The one held under Apex Industrial Properties, LLC. Maxine raised an eyebrow, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. Apex Industrial, she repeated. You mean the abandoned chemical facility we acquired 2 years ago for pennies just to strip the salvageable copper and steel, the one sitting on 15 acres of highly contaminated soil? That is exactly the one, I replied, taking a slow sip of my water. Maxine turned her laptop screen toward me. A topographic map of the property glowed brightly, displaying several alarming red zones. The Environmental Protection Agency has it classified as a Level 3 brownfield site, she explained, her voice crisp and professional. The ground is saturated with industrial runoff from the 1980s. It is heavily regulated. We have been holding it strictly to write off the depreciation while we outline a federal remediation plan. Why are we talking about this toxic wasteland, Kiara? Because a commercial real estate developer is currently trying to buy it from us, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. And he is in a massive hurry. Maxine frowned, pulling up the active escrow inquiries. We have had a few blind offers through third-party brokers, she noted, scrolling down the screen. There is one particularly aggressive buyer pushing for a rapid close. He keeps trying to bypass the standard environmental review periods to lock in the incredibly low asking price. He thinks we do not know what the land is worth for commercial zoning. He definitely thinks he is the smartest guy in the room, I said, my voice hardening. Who is the buyer listed on the preliminary term sheet, Maxine? She clicked a file and leaned forward, scanning the document. The buying entity is a newly formed shell corporation, but the primary guarantor signing the hard money loan is Trent Sterling. Maxine paused, looking up at me with a sudden flash of realization. Kiara, is that not your brother-in-law? The bank vice president who thinks he is Gordon Gekko. It is him, I confirmed, my smile widening. He bragged about the deal at Easter dinner. He told my parents he is going to build luxury condos and boutique coffee shops on that land. He just demanded that I give him my $6 million buyout to fund the purchase. And when I refused, he froze my personal checking account to teach me a lesson about the family hierarchy. Maxine let out a low whistle, closing her laptop. He wants to build luxury residential units on a Level 3 toxic chemical dump, she said, shaking her head in sheer disbelief. He is completely blinded by the cheap price per acre. If he actually pushes this through without a proper geological survey, he is walking straight into a financial slaughterhouse. Exactly, I said, leaning over the table. Trent is so desperate to close the deal and prove his superiority that he is cutting every corner. I want to sell it to him, Maxine. I want to give him exactly what he is begging for. Maxine steepled her fingers, a sharp, calculating look in her eyes. You understand the legal implications of this, Kiara. If Trent signs the standard commercial real estate contract and explicitly waives the environmental soil inspection period to close faster, he assumes 100% of the liability. The moment the deed transfers to his name, the Environmental Protection Agency will automatically assign the mandatory cleanup costs to him. We are talking about millions of dollars in federal fines and remediation fees. It will bankrupt him instantly. I know, I said, my voice ice cold. He told me I needed to learn my place. He threatened to ruin my credit and drag me back to poverty. Prepare the transfer documents, Maxine. Let Trent waive the inspections. Let him sign the contract. We are going to hand him the rope and let him tie his own noose. Maxine smiled a fierce, predatory grin. Consider it done, she said. Let us set the trap. I walked out of Maxine's sleek glass office building and stepped into the warm Atlanta afternoon air. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat, but I did not start the engine right away. I needed a moment to prepare. If this trap was going to work flawlessly, I had to deliver the acting performance of a lifetime. Trent was a narcissist, and narcissists only respond to one thing, which is absolute submission. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and forced myself to think about every cruel insult my family had hurled at me over the years. I thought about the isolation, the microaggressions, and the sheer exhaustion of never being enough. I let the genuine pain well up in my chest, and right when my throat felt tight and my eyes began to water, I picked up my phone and dialed his number. He answered on the fourth ring. He wanted to make sure I knew he was making me wait. "Hello, Trent," said his voice dripping with bored superiority. "Have you finally come to your senses, or are you calling to beg for grocery money?" I let out a ragged, carefully calibrated sob. It was just loud enough for him to hear the break in my voice. "Trent, please," I whispered, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "You win. You were right about everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the smug grin spreading across his face. He leaned back in his expensive office chair, reveling in the sound of my manufactured despair. "I knew you would see reason, Kiara," he said, his tone immediately shifting into a patronizing hum. "The real world is a harsh place for a naive girl playing pretend. That frozen credit account gave you a little reality check, did it not?" It terrified me, I lied, letting another tearful gasp slip through my lips. "I cannot live like this, Trent. I cannot have my own family against me." I realize now that I was being completely selfish. Mom and Dad were right. You are the financial expert. You know how to build generational wealth, and I am just a freelancer who got lucky one time. I do not want to lose my sister, and I do not want to be cast out of the family. Trent let out a deep sigh, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch perfectly. "I am glad you are finally taking responsibility, Kiara. It takes maturity to admit when you are out of your depth. So I assume you are ready to wire the $6 million into my commercial escrow account today." I wiped my completely dry eyes and stared blankly at my steering wheel. "I am ready, Trent," I said softly. "But I want to do it the right way. I want to apologize to the entire family, and I want to show everyone that I fully support your vision. Dominique told me about your 10-year anniversary gala at the country club next weekend. I know all the important church elders, and your big investors will be there." Trent hesitated for a second, clearly intrigued. "Go on," he prompted. "I want to sign the investment agreement publicly at the gala," I explained, making my voice sound eager and desperate for his approval. "I will transfer the funds to the escrow account beforehand, but we can do a formal signing ceremony during your speech. It will prove to your investors that your own family backs your South Atlanta project with millions of dollars in cash. It will make you look incredibly powerful, Trent. It will show Mom and Dad that I am finally submitting to the family structure. Please let me do this to make things right." I held my breath, waiting. I was dangling the ultimate prize in front of a raging egomaniac. I was offering him not just the money, but the public validation and the chance to humiliate me in front of the entire Atlanta elite. It was a temptation he simply could not resist. "That is actually a very mature proposition, Kiara," he said, his voice swelling with pride. "A public show of family unity will look fantastic to the zoning board. It shows that the Sterling family moves as a unified financial force. I accept your apology. I will have the bank unfreeze your little checking account immediately as a show of good faith. But do not try any tricks." "I would never." "Trent," I whispered meekly. "Thank you for giving me another chance." "See you at the gala thrift store, girl," he sneered before hanging up the phone. I lowered the phone from my ear. The second the call disconnected, the fake tremor in my hands vanished completely. My tears dried up instantly, leaving behind a cold, stone-faced resolve. He took the bait. His massive ego and his desperate need to be the white savior of our family had blinded him to the most obvious red flags. He was going to stand up in front of all his wealthy friends and proudly claim ownership of a toxic wasteland. I started the engine of my car, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove toward my real home. The countdown to the anniversary gala had officially begun. The very next morning, my phone rang at 7. It was Dominique. Her voice was shrill and vibrating with an aggressive kind of manic energy. "Get up, thrift store girl," she barked through the speaker. "If you are really committed to making things right, you are going to prove it. I am upgrading the entire anniversary gala today, and you are going to be my personal assistant. Meet me at the country club in an hour. Do not be late and wear something that does not embarrass me." I hung up the phone and smiled a cold smile. I quickly dressed in plain black slacks and a simple blouse, slipping my phone into my front pocket with the voice memo app already queued up. When I arrived at the sprawling estate of the Atlanta Country Club, Dominique was already sitting in the grand lobby, holding court with the event coordinator. She had completely lost her mind. The promise of my $6 million had triggered a deeply psychotic spending spree. I stood quietly behind her chair as she pointed a French manicured finger at the catering menu. "No, we are not doing the standard chicken and salmon," she declared, waving her hand dismissively. "I want the Wagyu beef carving station, the lobster tail towers, and the imported caviar bar. We are celebrating a multi-million-dollar family milestone." The coordinator looked nervous, tapping her tablet. "Mrs. Sterling, that will increase the catering budget by $20,000 alone. Shall I run the card on file?" Dominique did not even blink. "Run it," she commanded. "Trent just secured the biggest real estate deal of his life, and my little sister here is finally funding the family trust. Put it all on the platinum card." She snapped her fingers and pointed at me without turning around. "Kiara, go fetch me a non-fat iced vanilla latte from the Clubhouse Cafe. And carry these floral sample books. They are hurting my wrists." I picked up the 3 massive leather-bound sample books. They weighed at least 20 pounds, but I said nothing. I walked to the cafe, bought her overpriced coffee, and returned just in time to watch her sign a contract for a 12-piece live brass band. Over the next 4 hours, she dragged me across the entire city to meet with luxury vendors. She upgraded the centerpieces to imported white orchids. She rented a custom monogrammed LED dance floor. She even hired a celebrity photographer who charged an outrageous $1,000 an hour. By noon, she had racked up over $80,000 in brand new charges, all swiped on Trent's high-interest credit accounts. Every time she swiped a card, she made sure to hurl a toxic insult my way. "You really need to pay attention to how luxury works," Kiara Dominique sneered as we stood in a high-end stationery boutique. She shoved a massive box of gold foil invitations into my arms, forcing me to balance them awkwardly on top of the heavy floral books. "You have lived like a broke peasant for so long, you do not even know how to spend money. It is pathetic, really. Trent and I are showing you what actual success looks like in our community. You should be down on your knees thanking us for letting you be a part of this high society circle." I adjusted the heavy boxes in my arms and smiled meekly. "I am taking notes, Dominique," I said softly. "Oh, I doubt you could understand any of this." She laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that echoed in the boutique. "You have always been slow, Kiara. Always so dark and plain. That is why Mom and Dad had to protect you from the real world. You are just lucky I am generous enough to let you hold my bags today. Now go put these in the trunk of my Mercedes. Do not scratch the paint." I walked out into the sweltering Atlanta heat, carrying all her ridiculous purchases. What Dominique did not know was that my phone had been recording every single word of her unhinged rant. Every insult, every brag about the $80,000 she was putting on credit, every mention of Trent's supposed real estate victory was safely captured in crystal-clear audio. She thought she was establishing her absolute dominance, but she was actually documenting her own financial suicide. She was spending money she did not have on a lifestyle she could not afford, based entirely on a $6 million wire transfer that was never going to arrive. I loaded the heavy boxes into her trunk and closed it gently. The deadly financial trap was getting much deeper, and Dominique was practically sprinting toward the steep edge of the rocky cliff. The deadly financial trap was getting much deeper, and Dominique was practically sprinting toward the steep edge of the rocky cliff. Our next stop was an ultra-exclusive bridal and evening wear boutique in the heart of Buckhead. The kind of place where you needed an appointment just to look through the frosted glass windows. My mother Valerie was already waiting inside sipping sparkling water on a plush velvet sofa. When Dominique and I walked through the double doors, the boutique owner greeted them like royalty, while looking right past me as if I were part of the furniture. I stood awkwardly holding Dominique's oversized designer purse while she kissed our mother on both cheeks. "Did you get the floral arrangements sorted out?" my mother asked, looking Dominique up and down with absolute adoration. Dominique sighed dramatically, dropping onto the sofa next to her. "Yes, mother, but it was exhausting. I had to upgrade everything because Trent's investors expect a certain level of sophistication. Good thing Kiara is finally pulling her weight and paying for it." My mother shot me a cold, dismissive look. "Well, it is the least she can do after embarrassing us for so many years," Valerie said. "Put the bag down over there, Kiara, and try not to touch the silk gowns with your bare hands." I placed the heavy bag on a small table in the corner and took a seat on a small wooden stool far away from the velvet sofa. A sales associate brought out a rack of stunning evening gowns. They were breathtaking creations made of imported silk, hand-beaded lace, and delicate chiffon. Dominique immediately gravitated toward a shimmering champagne-colored dress, holding it up against her body in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling mirror. "Oh, sweetheart, that is absolutely perfect for you," my mother gushed, clapping her hands together. "The champagne color makes your light skin look so radiant and expensive. You have always had the perfect complexion for true high-end luxury." Dominique smiled proudly, twirling in front of the mirror. "It really does bring out my golden undertones," she agreed. She glanced at me through the reflection in the mirror, her smile turning into a cruel smirk. "Too bad Kiara could never wear something like this. Champagne just makes dark skin look so muddy and cheap." My mother nodded in solemn agreement, sipping her water. "It is a shame, really," Valerie said, pretending to sound sympathetic. "Darker tones are just so difficult to dress. They absorb the light instead of reflecting it. Kiara always looks like she is fading into the background. That is why I always told her to stick to plain black or navy blue. Luxury fabrics and bright colors just highlight her coarse features. It is better to just blend in when you do not have the right look for the spotlight." Their words were meant to cut me down, to remind me of my place at the absolute bottom of the family hierarchy. Growing up, comments like those used to send me running to my room in tears, scrubbing my skin in the shower as if I could somehow wash away my deep melanin. But sitting there on that uncomfortable wooden stool, listening to them bond over their shared colorism, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, calculating sense of pity. They were so deeply obsessed with appearances and proximity to whiteness that they were completely blind to the reality of the world around them. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, making sure to keep the screen angled away from their line of sight. While Dominique stepped onto the fitting pedestal to be measured for the $5,000 dress she was charging to Trent's maxed-out credit card, I opened my encrypted messaging app. I opened the direct chat with my wealth manager and lead attorney Maxine. The message from Maxine was already waiting for me. It read, "The Shell Company transfer is ready for your final authorization. Trent is pushing the broker to close the deal before the close of business today. He waived all inspections just like you predicted." I did not hesitate for a single second. I typed my response with steady fingers. "Execute the transfer now. Sign the final documents and release the deed to Trent's holding company. Let him have the land." I hit send and watched the little delivery checkmark appear. A moment later, Maxine replied with a single word. "Done." The South Atlanta property was officially his. The toxic wasteland, the Environmental Protection Agency fines, and the millions of dollars in federal liability now legally belonged to Trent Sterling. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. I looked up and smiled at my sister standing on the pedestal. While Dominique twirled in her expensive gown across town, Trent was sitting in a dimly lit office in a strip mall on the outskirts of the city. He was sweating through his custom shirt, despite the air conditioning blasting directly onto his neck. Across the scratched veneer desk sat Silas, a commercial real estate broker, known for facilitating fast, quiet deals that traditional banks usually avoided. Trent had bypassed his own reputable banking firm to use Silas because Silas did not ask too many questions, and he processed paperwork at lightning speed. Trent needed this deal closed and recorded by Friday afternoon so he could officially announce his massive victory at the anniversary gala on Saturday night. Silas pushed a thick stack of papers across the desk. He leaned back in his creaky leather chair, tapping a cheap plastic pen against his chin. He looked at Trent with a mixture of amusement and genuine caution. "Look, man," Silas said, his voice rough like gravel. "I am happy to take my commission on this, but I feel legally obligated to tell you to slow down. The seller accepted your initial offer way too fast. I have been in this game a long time, and when a holding company drops a 15-acre commercial parcel for half the market rate without any counteroffer, something is usually buried under the dirt." Trent scoffed, wiping his forehead with an embroidered handkerchief. He pulled a gold fountain pen from his breast pocket and began aggressively signing the first few pages of the document stack. "You are looking a gift horse in the mouth, Silas." Trent sneered, not even bothering to read the fine print. "The sellers are clearly amateurs who do not understand the upcoming zoning changes in South Atlanta. They probably bought it decades ago and just want to liquidate. I am a vice president of commercial lending. I do this for a living. I know a golden goose when I see one." Silas sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Even if that is true, you are completely skipping the standard 30-day due diligence period," Silas warned, leaning forward and placing a hand flat on the remaining paperwork. "You are bypassing the geological surveys and the Phase 1 environmental site assessment. That land is situated right in the middle of an old industrial sector. Back in the 80s, there were chemical plants all over that exact grid. If you find heavy metals or toxic sludge in the soil after you take ownership, the federal government will hold you personally liable. It will not be the seller's problem anymore. It will be yours. Do not be a fool, Trent. Just wait a few weeks and let the inspectors do their jobs." Trent slammed his hand down on the desk, making Silas jump. "I do not have a few weeks," Trent barked, his face turning a blotchy shade of red. "If I wait 30 days, word is going to get out about the new transit line expansion, and every major developer in the state will start a bidding war for this parcel. I need to lock this down right now before anyone else realizes the true value. I am not losing my legacy just because some lazy broker is afraid of a little risk. Besides, the city is desperate for gentrification in that area. They will wave through the residential permits the second they see my financial backing. Now give me the rest of the pages." Silas slowly slid his hand off the stack of papers. He looked at Trent like he was looking at a dead man walking. He had tried to warn him. He had fulfilled his ethical obligation as a broker. If this arrogant finance bro wanted to throw himself into an active volcano, Silas was not going to stand in his way. "Have it your way," Silas muttered, shaking his head. Trent aggressively flipped to the environmental waiver addendum. He did not read a single word of the dense legal text detailing the severe financial liabilities and federal penalties associated with brownfield properties. His vision was completely clouded by his own massive ego and his desperate need to prove his superiority to his wealthy investors. He wanted to stand on that stage at the country club and declare himself a real estate mogul. He placed his gold pen on the signature line and signed his name with a flourish, legally sealing his own absolute destruction. He tossed the pen onto the desk and smiled a greedy, predatory smile. The deal was officially done. He stood up, grabbed his expensive leather briefcase, and walked out of the door feeling completely unstoppable. The countdown to his public triumph and his ultimate downfall had truly started without him even realizing it right now. As Trent walked out of the strip mall, the sweltering Atlanta heat hit him. But he did not care at all. He felt 10 feet tall. He pulled his phone from his pocket and immediately dialed his wife. Dominique answered on the first ring, the loud sounds of the bridal boutique playing in the background. "It is done," Trent announced, his voice swelling with unearned pride. "I just signed the final acquisition papers for the South Atlanta parcel. We are officially commercial real estate developers." Dominique shrieked with pure joy on the other end of the line. "I knew you could do it," she squealed. "I just finished paying for the live band and the caviar bar. Saturday night is going to be the most incredible victory party this family has ever seen." Trent smiled, pressing the button on his key fob to unlock his leased BMW. "Make sure you invite the regional directors from the bank," Dominique, he instructed, sliding into the leather driver's seat. "I want everyone to see what a real power move looks like." He hung up the phone and started the engine, completely oblivious to the tinted black SUV parked discreetly across the street. Inside the tinted SUV sat Maxine, my lead corporate attorney. She had a tablet resting on her lap, illuminated by the bright glow of a freshly delivered email. Silas the broker was bound by professional confidentiality, but the documents Trent had just signed were immediately uploaded to the secure escrow portal, which Maxine controlled on my behalf. She tapped the screen, opening the final executed contract. Her eyes expertly scanned past the standard transfer clauses and the purchase prices. She was searching for one specific page. She swiped down to the addendums. There it was. Document 14, the waiver of environmental soil inspection. Maxine zoomed in on the signature line. Trent signed his name with dark blue ink, pressing so hard the digital scan picked up the heavy indentations of his arrogant strokes. He had explicitly initialed every single subparagraph, declining the Phase 1 environmental site assessment. He declined the soil testing. He declined the groundwater analysis. He completely waived his right to a standard 30-day due diligence period. Maxine pulled out her phone and dialed my private number. I was sitting on the wooden stool in the bridal boutique watching Dominique celebrate when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I stepped out of the showroom and walked into the quiet hallway before answering. "Is the trap set?" I asked, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. "The trap is locked, bolted, and buried," Maxine replied, her tone sharp and triumphant. "I am looking at his signature on the environmental waiver right now. He did not alter a single clause. He signed it exactly as we drafted it." I let out a slow breath, leaning against the cool wallpaper of the boutique hallway. "Explain the exact liability to me, Maxine," I said, wanting to hear the absolute finality of his massive mistake. "Under federal environmental protection laws, specifically the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act," Maxine began slipping into her full legal persona. "When a commercial buyer explicitly waives the Phase 1 inspection, they surrender the innocent landowner defense. The moment the deed is recorded tomorrow morning, Trent Sterling becomes strictly and fully liable for every single drop of toxic waste buried under that 15-acre property. It does not matter that he did not put the chemicals there. By waiving the inspection and buying the land as is, he assumed 100% of the financial responsibility for the federal cleanup." "How much will the immediate fines be?" I asked. "Based on our internal assessments of the chemical saturation, the Environmental Protection Agency will issue an immediate mandatory remediation order," she explained. "The minimum cleanup cost for a Level 3 brownfield site of that size is roughly $12 million. Because Trent formed a flimsy new shell company to buy the land and signed as the primary personal guarantor, the federal government will pierce the corporate veil instantly. They will freeze his bank accounts, his investment portfolios, and any assets attached to his Social Security number. He just bought himself a $12 million federal debt." I closed my eyes, absorbing the sheer magnitude of the destruction Trent had just orchestrated for himself. He wanted to steal my $6 million to build an empire, but instead, he had just signed his own financial death warrant. "There is only one missing piece," Maxine added, interrupting my dark thoughts. "To clear the escrow, he is using a hard money lender. He needs physical collateral to secure that loan by tomorrow. He does not have enough equity to cover it." He will ask my own parents, I said. He will ask my own parents, I said. My voice was eerily calm as the horrifying realization set in. He needs collateral for a short-term hard money loan to bridge the gap until he thinks my $6 million will hit his account on Monday. Maxine paused on the other end of the line. I could hear the rapid clicking of her keyboard as she logged into the Fulton County Public Property Records database. "Hold on, Kiara," she said, her voice losing its usual sharp professional edge and dropping into a tone of genuine disbelief. "Let me run a search on your parents' primary residence. Give me 10 seconds." I stood in the quiet hallway of the bridal boutique, listening to the faint sound of Dominique laughing in the showroom. The silence on the phone stretched out, feeling much heavier with every passing second as I waited for her answer. Kiara Maxine finally spoke, her voice tight. "I am looking at a newly recorded document that was filed just 2 hours ago. It is a deed of trust securing a high-interest commercial bridge loan for Trent's Shell Company. The collateral listed is the property address of your parents' house. They signed it over. Both your father Marcus and your mother Valerie provided their notarized signatures." I closed my eyes and leaned the back of my head against the wall. The air in my lungs felt suddenly toxic. That house was not just a piece of real estate. It was a deeply sacred piece of our family history. My grandfather Theodore had worked double shifts at a steel mill during the absolute worst years of segregation in the 1960s just to afford the down payment on that land. He endured unspeakable racism and grueling physical labor every single day to build a safe sanctuary for our family. It was the only tangible piece of generational wealth we possessed. He paid it off completely before he died, specifically so his children and grandchildren would never have to worry about a roof over their heads. And my parents had just handed the deed to a greedy, arrogant white man to fund his delusional real estate fantasy. "They did not even ask me," I whispered, the betrayal burning like acid in my throat. If Trent told them the deal was a sure thing, why did they not ask me to review the contracts? I am an actual corporate founder. "Because they do not respect you," Kiara Maxine said gently but firmly through the speaker. "They respect Trent's tailored suits and his proximity to whiteness. They believe his corporate finance jargon more than they believe in their own daughter's proven success. Trent probably convinced them that the bridge loan was just a 48-hour formality. He likely promised them that your $6 million wire transfer on Monday would instantly pay off the loan and release the lien on their house. They risked your grandfather's legacy because they trust a mediocre white man completely and view you only as a convenient backup plan to fund his ego." Maxine's words were brutal, but they were the absolute truth. My parents had weaponized my grandfather's hard-earned legacy to cater to the golden child and her arrogant husband. They were so blinded by their desperate need to maintain their bougie country club image that they literally signed away their own home. They thought they were making a brilliant investment. They thought they were elevating the family name. Instead, they had unknowingly tethered their entire financial existence to a $12 million toxic waste dump. When the Environmental Protection Agency came to collect Trent's fines, the bank would foreclose on my parents' house to recoup the defaulted commercial loan. They were going to lose everything. "Do you want to step in and stop the final escrow transfer?" Maxine asked softly, giving me one last chance to save them. "We still have a window to block the transaction and warn your parents before the deed to the South Atlanta land is officially recorded in Trent's name." I opened my eyes and looked down the hallway. I could see my mother handing her platinum credit card to the boutique owner to pay for Dominique's $5,000 dress using Trent's soon-to-be frozen accounts. They were laughing and celebrating my supposed submission. They felt zero remorse for how they treated me. "No," I said, my voice completely devoid of any remaining sympathy. "Let the escrow close. Let them lose the house. My grandfather built that wealth for a family that respected hard work and loyalty. The people standing in that boutique are nothing but parasites. They chose Trent and his empty promises. Now they can face the absolute consequences." I hung up the phone slowly. I hung up the phone slowly. The heavy silence of the boutique hallway wrapped around me, but my mind was moving at lightning speed. I had just made the conscious decision to let my parents lose the house my grandfather built. A younger version of me would have been crying, agonizing over the guilt of not saving them from their own terrible choices. But the woman standing there felt only a profound sense of clarity. They had made their bed with Trent, and now they were going to lose everything sleeping in it. I walked back into the showroom, grabbed Dominique's empty shopping bags, and played the role of the obedient little sister for the rest of the afternoon. The next 24 hours moved with a strange, eerie calmness. It was Friday afternoon, and I was sitting at the massive mahogany desk in my downtown penthouse office overlooking the Atlanta skyline. My laptop pinged with an incoming encrypted email from Maxine. The subject line was empty. I opened the message and found 3 attached PDF documents. The first was the official deed recorded by the county clerk's office. It clearly showed Trent's holding company as the sole legal owner of the 15-acre South Atlanta property. The hard money loan from the predatory lender had cleared, and the funds were completely locked into the escrow account. The second document was the collateral agreement proving my parents had officially signed away their home to secure his debt. But the third document was the real masterpiece of this entire operation. It was a digital receipt from the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. By law, whenever a Level 3 brownfield site changes hands, an automated notification is triggered to the regulatory board, updating the primary contact for compliance and hazardous waste remediation. Maxine had personally ensured the system updated the very second the deed was officially recorded. Trent was now the proud owner of a $12 million federal cleanup mandate. The warning letters and mandatory compliance orders were already being automatically generated by government computers. The trap was not just set, it had completely snapped shut. Trent was already financially ruined. He just did not know it yet. Saturday morning arrived with a clear, bright blue sky. It was the day of the 10-year anniversary gala. Dominique had texted me at dawn with a long list of aggressive demands. I was supposed to arrive 2 hours early through the service entrance to help the catering staff set up the imported caviar bar. I ignored her messages and walked into my massive walk-in closet. For years, my family had mocked my thrift store clothes, unaware that I only wore them around them to avoid their relentless begging and toxic jealousy. Today, I was finally going to show them exactly who I was. I reached past the casual linen dresses and pulled out a bespoke tailored Tom Ford pantsuit. It was a deep, rich, emerald green, a color my mother constantly told me I could never pull off because of my dark skin. The fabric was immaculate, the cut radiating absolute power and unapologetic wealth. I paired it with a pair of red-bottom Christian Louboutin heels and a simple but blindingly expensive Cartier watch. I looked at myself in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The dark-skinned woman staring back at me was not a victim. She was a self-made millionaire, a tech founder, and an apex predator who was about to dismantle an entire lineage of generational toxicity. But I was not going to wear the suit just yet. I carefully folded the emerald green jacket and trousers and placed them inside a sleek black garment bag. Then I turned to a small plastic shopping bag resting on the center island of my closet. Inside was a cheap, scratchy polyester maid uniform I had ordered online for $20. It was exactly the kind of humiliating outfit Dominique expected me to wear to serve her wealthy friends. She wanted me to look like the hired help so she could parade her superiority in front of the country club elite. I was going to give her exactly what she wanted right up until the moment I burned her entire world to the ground. I slipped into a pair of plain black leggings and an oversized hoodie, carrying the plastic bag in one hand and my designer garment bag in the other. I took the private elevator down to the secure underground parking garage of my building. My personal driver was already waiting beside my black Maybach, holding the rear door open for me. "We are heading to the Atlanta Country Club," I told him, sliding into the plush leather seat. "Keep the car running out front when we arrive. I might need to make a grand exit tonight." The heavy doors of the luxury vehicle closed, shutting out the outside world as we drove toward the most expensive and destructive party my family would ever host. The ride to the Atlanta Country Club was smooth and completely silent. My driver pulled up to the discreet service entrance around the back, just as I had instructed. I grabbed my bags, thanked him, and stepped out into the humid evening air. Inside the cramped, brightly lit employee locker room, I carefully hung my beautiful tailored emerald green power suit inside its protective black garment bag. I stripped off my comfortable clothes and pulled on the cheap polyester maid uniform. The stiff polyester fabric was incredibly cheap and scratched uncomfortably against my bare skin. The white apron strings felt like a leash, but I tied them securely behind my back. I looked at myself in the small cracked mirror above the employee sinks. I looked exactly like the helpless, submissive servant my family desperately wanted me to be. I took a deep, long breath, smoothed down the cheap, scratchy fabric, and pushed through the heavy, swinging metal doors into the chaotic catering kitchen. Dominique was already standing right there, screaming loudly at the head chef about the exact serving temperature of the expensive lobster tails. When she saw me, her face lit up with a twisted kind of predatory joy. "Oh, good, you actually showed up," she sneered, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. "That uniform is perfect for you, Kiara. It really perfectly highlights your exact low station in life. Now grab a large silver tray and get out there right now. The most important guests are arriving, and Trent's wealthy investors expect nothing but absolute premium service." I did not say a single word. I simply nodded, picked up a very heavy silver tray fully loaded with crystal flutes of expensive champagne, and walked straight out into the grand ballroom. The sight was almost comical in its sheer financial irresponsibility. The room was dripping with rented luxury. The custom monogrammed dance floor gleamed under the massive crystal chandeliers. Thousands of imported white orchids cascaded down from the ceiling, and the 12-piece brass band was already playing a smooth jazz arrangement. It was an $80,000 illusion built entirely on a fragile foundation of stolen credit and toxic waste. I began circulating through the crowd, balancing the heavy tray on one hand. The elite members of my parents' church were all there wearing their finest tailored suits and designer gowns. As I approached a group of older church ladies, I recognized Mrs. Higgins, the head of the charity committee. She took a glass of champagne from my tray and then actually did a double take when she realized who was serving her. "Oh my goodness, Kiara, is that you?" Mrs. Higgins gasped, her voice dripping with fake pity. "Your mother told us you were struggling with your little freelance business, but I had no idea things had gotten this bad. It is so incredibly generous of Trent and Dominique to give you some catering work for the evening." I offered her a polite, tight smile. "Yes, ma'am. They are incredibly generous," I replied, my voice completely flat. The other women in the circle exchanged knowing, smug glances, whispering behind their manicured hands as I walked away. Every step I took across that ballroom was met with another insult, another microaggression, or another look of sheer contempt. My older cousin Marcus, who had just recently finished law school, laughed openly when I offered him a drink. He told me I should have studied harder so I would not have to fetch drinks for the successful people in the family. My mother, Valerie, glided past me in a new sequined gown, refusing to make eye contact, simply snapping her fingers and pointing at an empty glass on a nearby table, signaling me to clean it up. They were intoxicated by their own perceived superiority and arrogance. They thought I was drowning in poverty and humiliation. But as I moved silently through the glittering rooms serving their stolen champagne, I felt absolutely invincible. I absorbed every single whisper and cruel joke with a cold, knowing smile. I knew exactly what was sitting in the federal government database at that very moment. I knew about the massive $12 million federal fine. I knew about the foreclosed family home. I knew that every single person in this room treating me like dirt was currently drinking on a tab that would never be paid. The brass band played louder, and the laughter echoed off the high ceilings as the Sterling family celebrated their ultimate triumph. I just kept walking, serving champagne and waiting patiently for the show to begin. Trent would stand on that stage, soak up the applause, and try to take my $6 million. And when he did, I would gladly hand him his absolute destruction. Suddenly, the smooth jazz music faded out as the 12-piece brass band brought their instruments down. The loud chatter of the grand ballroom began to quiet. I stood silently, near the very back of the huge room, by a massive pillar, holding my silver tray as the sharp sound of a silver spoon clinking against a crystal champagne flute cut through the air. It was my mother, Valerie. She was standing at the edge of the monogrammed dance floor, holding a microphone in one hand and her glass in the other. The bright spotlight hit her sequined gown, making her look like the glowing matriarch she always pretended to be. "Ladies and gentlemen," Valerie began, her voice projecting clearly through the expensive sound system. "If I could have your attention, please. Tonight we are gathered to celebrate a decade of marriage between my beautiful daughter Dominique and her incredible husband Trent." The crowd erupted into polite applause. Dominique leaned her head on Trent's shoulder, playing the role of the adoring wife. Valerie held up her free hand to quiet the room, her smile widening into a beaming expression of absolute pride. "But tonight is about more than just a wedding anniversary," Valerie continued, pacing slowly across the floor. "Tonight is a celebration of vision. It is a celebration of legacy. In our community, we talk a lot about building generational wealth, but very few people actually have the intelligence and the drive to execute it. Trent Sterling is one of those rare visionary men. As many of you know, Trent just closed a massive commercial real estate deal this week, securing a prime 15-acre parcel in South Atlanta. He is going to transform that area. He is the absolute savior of our family finances, and he is elevating the Sterling name into the highest echelons of this city." More applause washed over the room. Several wealthy investors from Trent's bank raised their glasses in his direction. Trent nodded, his chest puffed out so far I thought the buttons on his custom suit might actually pop off. He was eating up every single second of the unearned adulation. Valerie took a sip of her champagne, and then her eyes scanned the crowd. She was looking for me. When her gaze finally landed on me standing in the shadows with my cheap polyester uniform and white apron, a cruel, triumphant smirk crossed her face. "Of course, building an empire requires everyone to play their part," Valerie said, her voice taking on a sharp, condescending edge. "Some people in this world are blessed with the ambition to build mansions, while others are simply meant to sweep the floors inside them. My younger daughter Kiara is with us tonight." She pointed directly at me. The spotlight operator, thinking this was a heartwarming family moment, swung the bright beam of light across the room, hitting me squarely in the face. Every single head in the grand ballroom turned to look at me holding my tray of empty glasses. "Kiara has always struggled to find her path," Valerie said, sighing dramatically into the microphone. "She never quite grasped the concepts of hard work or high-level success. But we believe in keeping family close even when they fall short. So Trent and Dominique graciously allowed her to work the catering staff tonight. Because, as I always say, some of us are born to lead, and some are simply born to serve. Let us all give Kiara a hand for finally contributing something useful to a family event." A ripple of laughter tore through the room. It was not warm or good-natured. It was the harsh, mocking laughter of rich people looking down on someone they deemed inferior. Mrs. Higgins chuckled openly behind her hand. Marcus shook his head. Dominique leaned into Trent's ear, whispering something, making him laugh. The humiliation was designed to completely break my spirit in front of everyone I knew. I stood frozen in the spotlight, but I did not cry. I did not look away. I looked straight into my mother's eyes, and I offered her a polite, shallow bow. The gesture only made the crowd laugh harder. They thought I was accepting my defeat. They thought they had finally put the thrift store girl in her proper place forever. What they could not see was the burning, quiet fury behind my eyes. What they did not know was that my phone was currently linked to the massive projector screen hanging right behind the stage. Valerie raised her glass high into the air. To Trent and Dominique, she cheered loudly. The crowd echoed her toast, drinking their expensive champagne. Valerie handed the microphone directly to Trent. It was his turn to speak and boldly claim his ultimate grand prize. Trent gripped the heavy microphone tightly. He stepped directly into the center of the spotlight, flashing a bright, practiced smile that reached every corner of the grand ballroom. "Thank you, Valerie," he said, his voice booming out of the massive speakers. "And thank you to everyone who came out tonight to celebrate this massive milestone with Dominique and me." I look around and see the elite of Atlanta. I see regional directors from the bank. I see all the top-tier investors who have always trusted my financial instincts. Tonight, I am proud to announce that your trust is about to pay off in a historic way. A hushed murmur of anticipation swept through the wealthy crowd. Trent unbuttoned his custom suit jacket and slid one hand casually into his pocket, playing the role of the relaxed billionaire perfectly. Just yesterday afternoon, I officially closed on 15 acres of prime commercial real estate right in the heart of the South Atlanta development corridor, he announced proudly. The investors in the front row began to clap loudly. Trent held up his hand to quiet them down, wanting to stretch out his moment of glory. "It gets better," he chuckled loudly. "The land is perfectly zoned for a massive luxury mixed-use development. We are going to build high-end residential units and boutique retail spaces. But the absolute best part of this deal is the price." He leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly, as if he were letting the entire room in on a highly classified secret. "I bought this property for less than half of its projected market value," Trent bragged, his ego practically radiating off the stage. The anonymous seller was completely clueless. They were amateur holding company executives who clearly panicked and just wanted to liquidate their assets fast. They had absolutely no idea about the upcoming transit expansion or the true value of the dirt they were sitting on. They were so desperate to sell that I managed to bypass the standard 30-day due diligence period entirely. I explicitly waived the environmental inspections and the geological surveys to lock them into the incredibly low price before they could change their minds. I completely outsmarted them at their own game. My corporate attorney Maxine had told me he would be proud of cutting those corners, but hearing him actually brag about signing his own $12 million death warrant in front of a room full of financial experts was almost too delicious to comprehend. Several of the older bankers in the crowd exchanged slightly concerned looks at the mention of waived environmental inspections, but Trent was completely oblivious to their silent warnings. He was too drunk on his own perceived genius to notice the glaring legal red flags he was waving right in their faces. But a massive real estate empire cannot be built alone. Trent continued, his tone shifting from boastful to deeply patronizing. "It takes a solid financial foundation. It takes family. My in-laws Marcus and Valerie understand this concept better than anyone else here. They graciously stepped up and provided the initial collateral to bridge the escrow gap because they believe in my grand vision. And now it is time for the rest of the Sterling family to step up and contribute to this incredible legacy." Trent turned his body fully toward me. I was still standing in the shadows near the grand pillar, wearing the cheap polyester maid uniform with the white apron strings tied tightly around my waist. He pointed directly at me, his smile turning into a sharp, predatory sneer. "Kiara." He called out, his voice echoing loudly across the silent room. "Come on up here. Step into the light. Do not be shy. We all know you have been struggling, but tonight is the night you finally turn your life around. Tonight is the night you prove your worth and become a real part of this family. Come up to the stage and join your sister." The entire grand ballroom fell completely dead silent. Hundreds of eyes turned to stare at the dark-skinned woman in the cheap catering uniform. My mother crossed her arms, looking deeply satisfied by my public submission. Dominique was practically vibrating with excitement, ready to watch me officially hand over my $6 million tech buyout to her arrogant husband. I slowly placed my heavy silver tray full of empty champagne flutes onto a nearby catering table. I smoothed down the front of my scratchy apron and began the long, slow walk toward the brightly lit stage. Every single step I took echoed softly in the quiet room. They thought I was walking straight to my own financial execution. They had absolutely no idea that I was the one holding the heavy, sharp axe. I climbed the 3 short carpeted steps to the main stage, my cheap rubber-soled shoes squeaking slightly against the polished wood. The glaring spotlight followed my every move, washing out the glittering crowd in front of me. Trent stepped forward to meet me, his chest puffed out like a proud rooster. He reached out and grabbed my shoulder, squeezing it a little too hard. It was a physical warning disguised as an affectionate embrace. "Let us give a warm round of applause to my sister-in-law Kiara," he announced to the room. "She has finally decided to stop living in the past and start building for the future. She is making her very first smart financial decision tonight by partnering with me on the South Atlanta Development Project." The crowd offered a slow, polite smattering of applause. Dominique drifted over to stand right next to Trent, her champagne gown shimmering under the lights. She looked at me with a sickeningly sweet smile, but her eyes were cold and hard. "We are so proud of you, Kiara," she said into the microphone, her voice dripping with fake emotion. "It takes a lot of humility to admit when you need help managing your life." Trent reached into the inside pocket of his custom-tailored suit jacket and pulled out a neatly folded legal document. He shook it open with a sharp flick of his wrist. He held it out toward me, his other hand pulling a heavy gold fountain pen from his breast pocket. "This is a simple transfer of capital agreement," Trent explained, projecting his voice so the investors in the front row could hear every single word. "It outlines the $6 million investment Kiara is making into my newly formed holding company. In exchange, she gets to say she helped build the Sterling family empire. It is a win for everyone." He pushed the document and the gold pen into my hands. I looked down at the paper. It was not a partnership agreement. It was an irrevocable deed of transfer. It essentially surrendered all my assets to his total control without granting me a single share of equity in his toxic real estate venture. It was a fraudulent, predatory document designed to strip me of everything I had earned and legally bind me to his massive ego. I looked at the signature line at the very bottom, waiting for my name. The entire grand ballroom fell completely silent. The brass band had stopped playing. The waiters had stopped pouring drinks. Hundreds of wealthy elites stood perfectly still, holding their crystal glasses, waiting to see if the thrift store girl would actually submit. They were waiting for me to bow my head and sign away my life to the brilliant white savior standing next to me. In the front row, my mother Valerie nodded at me, tapping her own wrist to tell me to hurry up. My father Marcus stood beside her, crossing his arms with a stern, expectant look on his face. Trent leaned in close to me, dropping his fake public smile. He lowered his voice so only I could hear him, his breath smelling strongly of expensive bourbon. "Sign the paper right now." "Thrift store girl," he hissed viciously into my ear. "Sign it and give me the money, or I swear I will make sure you never step foot in this city again. You are nothing without this family. You are a joke. Prove your loyalty, or you are completely dead to us." I looked down at the heavy gold pen in my hand. It felt cold and foreign against my skin. I slowly rolled it between my fingers, feeling the engraved ridges of the expensive metal. Dominique bumped her shoulder against mine aggressively. "Stop stalling and sign it," she whispered harshly, her flawless smile still plastered on her face for the audience. "Everyone is watching you embarrass yourself. Just do what you are told for once in your miserable life." I slowly lifted my head and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. I saw Mrs. Higgins whispering to her friends. I saw the bank executives waiting for the grand finale of Trent's real estate presentation. I looked back at Trent. His eyes were wide with greedy anticipation, practically vibrating with the desperate need to take my wealth. He thought he had backed me into an inescapable corner. He thought public humiliation was the ultimate weapon. But public humiliation only works if you actually care about the opinions of the people in the room. I did not care about a single soul standing in that ballroom. I did not take the cap off the gold pen. I did not look back down at the fraudulent legal document. Instead, I closed my fist around the pen and took a deep breath, feeling the absolute certainty of what I was about to do. I opened my hand and let the heavy gold fountain pen drop. It hit the polished wooden stage with a sharp, loud clack that echoed through the dead silent ballroom. Trent blinked, his smug smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Before he could even process what was happening, I reached out and snatched the heavy microphone right out of his hand. The sudden aggressive movement caused a loud burst of static to blast through the expensive sound system, making several people in the front row flinch and cover their ears. My submissive posture vanished completely. I rolled my shoulders back and stood up to my full height. The cheap, scratchy polyester-made uniform suddenly looked less like a symbol of servitude and more like a deliberate mocking costume. I looked directly at Trent and then over at my sister Dominique. Their faces shifted from greedy anticipation to total confusion. "What are you doing, Kiara, my mother?" Valerie hissed from the front row, her face turning a deep shade of angry red. "Stop playing games and sign the paper." I ignored her completely. I brought the microphone up to my mouth. "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice booming across the grand ballroom with a cold, terrifying authority that no one in my family had ever heard before. "I am not giving you a single dime of my money, Trent, and I am certainly not funding this pathetic illusion of a real estate empire." Trent stepped toward me, his face flushing with absolute fury. "Give me that microphone right now, you crazy thrift store girl," he growled, reaching out to grab my arm. I did not flinch. I simply raised my free hand into the air and snapped my fingers. The sharp sound cut through the tense air like a gunshot. Instantly, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom slammed shut with a massive echoing thud. The entire crowd turned around in shock. 6 massive men dressed in identical black tactical suits stepped into the room. They were my private corporate security detail, led by a man named Jackson, who had been coordinating with my attorney Maxine all week. They moved with absolute military precision. 2 of them stood directly in front of the locked exit doors, crossing their massive arms. 2 others flanked the sides of the stage, creating an impenetrable wall between me and my furious family. The remaining 2 security guards walked briskly toward the audio-visual control booth at the side of the room. The country club technician tried to step in their way, but my men simply moved him aside without a single word. One of the guards pulled a small silver USB drive from his pocket and plugged it directly into the main console linked to the massive projector screen hanging right behind me on the stage. The wealthy investors in the crowd began to murmur nervously. Mrs. Higgins clutched her pearl necklace, looking around in absolute panic. My father Marcus tried to step onto the stage, but one of my security guards immediately placed a heavy hand on his chest, pushing him back down to the floor. "You cannot do this, Kiara," my father shouted, his voice cracking with blind rage. "You are ruining your sister's anniversary. You are ruining our family name right in front of all our closest friends." I turned my back on him and looked directly at the group of elite bank executives and real estate investors sitting in the VIP section. These were the exact men Trent had been desperately trying to impress all night. These were the powerful people he wanted to worship him. "Trent Sterling just stood on this very stage and told you all that he is a financial genius," I announced, my voice echoing powerfully off the high ceilings. "He told you he secured a prime piece of South Atlanta real estate for half its market value because the seller was an amateur. He bragged about skipping the standard 30-day due diligence period and explicitly waiving all environmental soil inspections just to lock in the incredibly cheap price. He wanted you to completely believe he outsmarted the entire commercial market." Trent was breathing heavily, his fists clenched tightly at his sides, but he was far too intimidated by the armed security guards to physically attack me. "Shut up, Kiara," he yelled, his voice dripping with sudden, absolute panic. "Someone cut her microphone right now. Someone get her out of here before she ruins everything." No one moved at all. The wealthy crowd was completely paralyzed, captivated by the unfolding disaster. He stood frozen, completely unsure of how to handle this hostile takeover. Before I give you a dime, Trent, let's show your investors what you just bought. The massive projector screen behind me hummed to life, casting a bright white glow over the entire stage. A high-resolution image of a legal document appeared towering over us. It was the final acquisition contract for the South Atlanta property. The crowd leaned in, squinting at the dense text. Trent stared at the screen, his face twisting in confusion. "What is the meaning of this, Kiara?" he demanded, his voice trembling slightly, but still attempting to project authority. "Are you trying to steal my presentation?" I turned to face the investors in the front row. As Trent so proudly stated earlier, he bought this 15-acre parcel from an anonymous holding company called Apex Industrial Properties. I said, my voice steady and commanding. "He told you they were amateurs who panicked and sold the land for a fraction of its market value. He bragged about outsmarting them." I took a slow, deliberate step toward Trent. "I am the sole managing member of Apex Industrial Properties," I revealed. I was the anonymous seller. A collective gasp rippled through the grand ballroom. The clinking of glasses stopped completely. Mrs. Higgins dropped her jaw. My mother, Valerie, gripped the edge of her table, her knuckles turning completely white. Dominique stared at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. Trent took a step back, his eyes darting frantically between my face and the massive document on the screen. "No," he stammered, shaking his head. "That is impossible. You are a broke freelancer. You sell old clothes on the internet. I sell eco-friendly waste management software to the federal government," I corrected him, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. "And earlier this week I finalized the $6 million buyout that Dominique so rudely discovered in my bag. But my company also acquires heavily regulated properties for tax depreciation purposes. Properties exactly like the one you just desperately rushed to purchase." Trent swallowed hard, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. The wealthy executives in the audience were no longer looking at him with admiration. They were looking at him with deep suspicion. "Well then, thank you for the cheap land." "Thrift store girl." Trent sneered, trying desperately to regain control of the narrative. "Even if you owned it, you just sold me a gold mine for pennies. I am still going to build luxury condos on it and make a fortune. You just played yourself in front of everyone." I smiled a slow, chilling smile. I raised my hand and signaled my security guard at the audio-visual booth. "Change the slide," I commanded. The screen flashed black for a fraction of a second before a new image illuminated the stage. It was not a blueprint for luxury condos. It was a brightly colored satellite map, covered in alarming red and dark purple warning zones. The official seal of the Environmental Protection Agency was stamped clearly in the top right corner. The wealthy real estate investors in the front row immediately recognized the format. Several of them physically recoiled in their seats. One bank director covered his mouth in absolute horror. Trent turned around to look at the screen. His arrogant sneer slowly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He stumbled backward, almost tripping over his own expensive shoes. "What you are looking at, ladies and gentlemen, is an official federal hazard map," I announced, my voice echoing mercilessly through the silent ballroom. The 15 acres Trent just proudly purchased is not prime development land. It is a designated Level 3 toxic waste dump. Back in the 1980s, it was a chemical manufacturing plant that illegally buried industrial runoff, heavy metals, and highly corrosive sludge directly into the soil. The silence in the room was so absolute you could hear the air conditioning humming. Trent was hyperventilating, his chest heaving under his custom-tailored suit. He looked frantically at his investors, but they were already pulling their phones out, dialing their legal teams, backing away from the stage, as if Trent himself was suddenly radioactive. "You cannot build luxury condos on a chemical dump," Trent, I said, turning to face him fully. "You cannot build a coffee shop on top of buried arsenic. The land is completely useless for commercial development. That is why it was priced so cheaply. That is why any competent broker would have begged you to run a standard geological survey. But you were so desperate to feel superior, so desperate to show off your unearned wealth tonight, that you completely bypassed the most basic rule of real estate. You let your massive ego blind you to a blatant federal trap. And now you are going to pay the ultimate price for your blinding ignorance and your absolute endless greed. I stared at him, letting the heavy silence stretch across the room. Under federal environmental protection laws, there is a specific provision dealing with contaminated industrial sites, I explained, pacing slowly across the front of the stage. My voice was calm, methodical, and utterly devoid of pity. It is designed to hold property owners strictly liable for hazardous waste remediation. When a buyer purchases a commercial property, they are legally entitled to a due diligence period to inspect the soil. If they find toxic waste, they can walk away from the deal completely unharmed without spending a single dime. This law was created to prevent negligent developers from passing their poisonous messes on to the taxpayers. Trent was shaking his head back and forth, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. But if a buyer is arrogant enough to explicitly waive that Phase 1 inspection, I continued, keeping my eyes locked on his pale face, they legally surrender their innocent landowner defense. By signing that waiver, Trent, you told the federal government that you accept the property exactly as it is, without any reservations or future complaints whatsoever. You assumed 100% of the liability for every single ounce of toxic sludge buried under that dirt. It does not matter that you did not put the chemicals there yourself. The second the county clerk recorded the deed in your holding company's name this morning, the cleanup became your sole personal responsibility. You thought you were cutting corners to secure a cheap deal, but you actually walked straight into a massive financial slaughterhouse. You signed your own death warrant with that fancy gold fountain pen. I turned back to the massive screen and raised my hand. Signaling my security team in the control booth, I commanded them to show the federal notice. The satellite map disappeared from the projector screen and was instantly replaced by a blown-up image of a formal email. The sender address clearly displayed the official domain of the Environmental Protection Agency. The timestamp showed it had been delivered just a few hours ago. Because you bypassed the standard review process, the Federal Registry automatically flagged the transfer of a Level 3 brownfield site, I explained, projecting my voice over the quiet murmurs of the terrified investors in the audience. This is the automated compliance mandate that was sent directly to the email address registered under your brand new shell company. Check your phone, Trent. It has been sitting in your inbox all afternoon while you were busy drinking champagne and bragging about your genius. Trent frantically dug into the pocket of his tailored jacket, pulling out his phone. His hands were shaking so violently, he almost dropped it onto the stage. He swiped across the screen, opening his email application. I read the projected text aloud for the entire grand ballroom to hear, making sure every word landed perfectly. Pursuant to the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, you are hereby ordered to begin immediate mandatory remediation of the hazardous materials located at the designated site. Failure to comply will result in federal asset seizure and potential criminal prosecution. The estimated minimum cost for the required chemical extraction and soil replacement is exactly $12 million. The number echoed through the high ceilings of the country club, hanging in the air like a death sentence. $12 million. Trent stared at the screen of his phone, his eyes wide with absolute disbelief and pure, undeniable horror. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a custom suit. He let out a low, agonizing gasp, his knees buckled beneath him. He collapsed onto the polished wooden floor of the stage, his expensive pants tearing slightly at the knee. He dropped his phone and gripped his hair, pulling at the perfectly styled strands as a guttural sob tore from his throat. The wealthy executives sitting in the front row stood up from their tables. These were men who managed billions of dollars, and they knew a toxic financial sinkhole immediately. They did not look at Trent with pity. They looked at him with absolute disgust, whispering frantically among themselves. One regional bank director pulled out his phone, calling his legal department, instructing them to freeze all institutional ties with Trent's firm. My mother Valerie was frozen in her seat, her jaw hanging open in pure shock. Dominique took a step back away from her weeping husband, gripping the fabric of her expensive gown. She looked at the $12 million figure projected above and gasped aloud in sudden absolute terror, realizing that their entire life was completely destroyed forever now. I stood tall on the stage watching their pathetic empire finally burn. I stood tall on the stage watching their pathetic empire finally burn. The shock in the room quickly morphed into pure chaotic desperation. My father Marcus pushed past a wealthy investor and marched right up to the edge of the stage. His face was a terrifying mask of rage and absolute panic. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice echoing through the silent room. "You are going to fix this right now, Kiara," he screamed, his chest heaving with every ragged breath. "You are going to wire that $6 million to the Environmental Protection Agency and clear this up. You set your brother-in-law up, and you are going to pay the penalty immediately." My mother Valerie rushed up to stand right beside him. She was no longer the poised, elegant matriarch of the Sterling family. Her expensive sequined gown looked ridiculous as she gripped the edge of the wooden stage, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the wood. She looked up at me with wild, desperate eyes. "Listen to your father, Kiara," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the immense pressure of the terrifying moment. "You have the money. You just said you sold your tech company for $6 million. You have to save Trent. If he goes down, he is going to drag this entire family down with him. You owe us this. You owe this family your absolute loyalty." I looked down at my parents. The people who had spent my entire life belittling me, isolating me and treating me like an embarrassing burden, were now begging me to save them from their own catastrophic greed. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel the slightest urge to protect them. "You still do not understand how federal environmental law works. Do you, Dad?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm and perfectly steady. $6 million would only cover half of the minimum mandatory fine. Trent owes $12 million. Even if I wanted to help, which I absolutely do not, I could not save him from the financial grave he just enthusiastically dug for himself. Trent let out another agonizing sob from the floor of the stage, his hands covering his face in pure shame. "But that is not even the worst part of your current situation," I continued, taking a slow step closer to the edge of the stage where my parents were standing. "Because Trent did not just sign an environmental waiver today. He also needed a massive hard money loan to close the escrow account on that toxic wasteland. He needed physical collateral to secure that high-interest commercial bridge loan, and he did not have enough equity in his own personal assets." My father froze completely. All the aggressive, righteous anger instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking incredibly old and deeply fragile. My mother let out a small, terrified gasp, taking a slow step back from the stage as the horrifying realization finally hit her. I raised my hand and signaled my security team in the audio-visual booth one more time. The massive federal notice disappeared from the projector screen behind me. It was immediately replaced by a scanned copy of a highly detailed notarized legal document. The bold black letters at the very top of the page clearly read Deed of Trust and Collateral Agreement. The wealthy crowd of investors murmured loudly, stepping even further away from my totally ruined family. I turned back to the microphone to deliver the final devastating blow. "In order to secure his loan, Trent convinced you both to sign over the deed to the family home," I announced, my voice ringing with absolute cold finality. "You gave him the beautiful house that my grandfather Theodore worked his entire life to buy. You handed over the only real piece of generational wealth this family ever possessed, just to fund the massive, fragile ego of a mediocre white man who relentlessly called me a thrift store girl." My father shook his head rapidly, refusing to believe the reality staring him right in the face. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the tense silence of the ballroom. "Trent promised us it was just a simple 48-hour bridge loan. He said your money would clear the account on Monday. and the lien would be released automatically. "There is no money coming on Monday, Dad," I stated, my expression completely unreadable. "Trent used your completely paid-off luxury house as collateral for a piece of commercial property that now carries a massive $12 million federal lien. When the Environmental Protection Agency seizes his corporate assets to pay for the mandatory hazardous waste cleanup, the hard money lender will immediately call in the defaulted loan. They will foreclose on your house by Monday morning." I looked directly into my mother's horrified, tear-filled eyes, and then down at my broken father. "You bet your entire family legacy on a greedy fool," I said coldly. "And now you have absolutely nothing left." A piercing shriek shattered the stunned silence of the grand ballroom. Dominique could no longer maintain her polished socialite facade. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into an ugly mask of pure feral rage. "You ruined my life!" she screamed, tearing at the delicate silk skirt of her $5,000 champagne gown as she sprinted toward the stage. She lunged at me, her manicured hands outstretched like claws aiming directly for my face. I did not even flinch. Before Dominique's expensive heels could touch the first wooden step, Jackson, my lead security guard, stepped smoothly into her path. He did not use excessive force. He simply planted his massive frame between us and caught her by the shoulders, stopping her aggressive momentum instantly. Dominique thrashed against his iron grip, screaming vicious obscenities that made the elite church ladies in the front row loudly gasp and clutch their pearl necklaces. "Let me go. I am going to kill her," she wailed, her flawless makeup smearing with angry tears. "She stole our money." The chaotic spectacle was suddenly interrupted by a sharp, authoritative voice cutting through the frightened crowd from the back of the room. "Enough," barked Mr. Kensington, the usually incredibly polite and invisible general manager of the Atlanta Country Club. He was marching briskly across the custom monogrammed dance floor, his face flushed with extreme anger. He was flanked by two club security officers and holding a thick stack of printed receipts in his hand. The wealthy guests hurriedly parted to let him through, eager to distance themselves from the unfolding trashy spectacle. Mr. Kensington stopped right next to the sobbing Trent and the thrashing Dominique. He did not look at them with the polite deference he usually reserved for his elite members. He looked at them with utter disgust. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice cold and loud enough for every single investor and bank executive to hear clearly, "I need you to step away from the stage and provide a valid form of payment immediately." Dominique stopped fighting Jackson's grip, blinking rapidly in total confusion. "What are you talking about?" she snapped, trying to smooth her ruined hair. "I gave you my platinum card this morning. Run it again." "We have run it 6 times," Mr. Kensington replied, holding up the stack of long red inked receipts. "We also ran the 2 backup corporate credit cards belonging to your husband. Every single transaction has been declined. In fact, my billing department just received an automated alert from the merchant bank. All accounts associated with Trent Sterling's Social Security number and corporate entities have been subjected to an emergency federal freeze." Another loud collective gasp rippled through the crowd of executives. The automated Environmental Protection Agency liability notice I had projected on the screen earlier had already triggered the mandatory asset freeze. The federal government moves incredibly fast when it comes to securing funds for a $12 million toxic waste cleanup. Trent's accounts were completely locked down, making him instantly penniless. "You currently owe this establishment over $80,000 for the caviar, the brass band, the custom dance floor, and the imported orchids," Mr. Kensington stated, his tone completely unforgiving. "You have consumed our premium inventory on false pretenses. If you cannot provide a working credit card right now, I am locking down the ballroom and calling the authorities." Dominique looked wildly around the room. She turned to our mother, who was weeping silently into her hands. "Mom, pay him," Dominique begged, her voice cracking with sheer panic. "Use your card." But Valerie just shook her head, her eyes wide with terror. She could not pay. Her own assets were legally tied to the house, which was now tied to Trent's frozen fraudulent shell company. They were all completely broke. The $80,000 illusion had just violently crashed into reality. I stood calmly above them all, adjusting the collar of my cheap polyester-made uniform. I reached into the deep pocket of my white apron and pulled out my plain leather wallet. From the folds, I extracted a heavy, sleek titanium card. It was an exclusive American Express Centurion black card, completely by invitation only. It was a legendary status symbol that none of the wealthy bank executives in the room even possessed. I walked to the edge of the stage and held the heavy metal card out to the furious club manager. Mr. Kensington looked up, recognizing the weight and significance of the black titanium instantly. His angry demeanor shifted to one of sudden, sharp respect. "Sir," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the quiet room. "Before my shift started tonight, I poured myself exactly 1 glass of your imported sparkling water from the kitchen. I believe the menu price is $12. Please charge my personal account for that specific beverage." Mr. Kensington carefully took the black card from my hand, nodding respectfully. "Right away, Mom," he said. I looked down at my sister, who was staring at my limitless credit card with an expression of pure, starved agony. As for the rest of this $80,000 unpaid tab, I told the manager, my eyes locked on Dominique's ruined, tear-stained face. "I highly suggest you call the police immediately. These people are broke, and they just committed massive wire fraud against your business." Mr. Kensington did not hesitate for a single second. He pulled a black two-way radio from his belt and instructed the front desk to contact the local authorities and lock down the main gates of the country club. The sound of his order echoing through the quiet room was the spark that finally ignited the powder keg. The elite bank executives and wealthy investors who had been standing frozen in shock suddenly snapped out of their trance. They realized that if the federal government was seizing Trent's corporate accounts, any capital they had recently invested with his firm might also be frozen or heavily audited. A wave of pure panic swept across the VIP section. Several older men in expensive tuxedos rushed the stage shouting at Trent, demanding immediate answers about their investment portfolios. They completely surrounded him, their faces red with fury. But it was my father Marcus who reached him first. The man who had spent my entire life preaching about the importance of family loyalty and polite society completely snapped. The realization that he had just handed over his lifelong home to a fraudulent con artist broke something deep inside his mind. Marcus grabbed Trent by the lapels of his custom suit, yanking him violently up from his knees. "You stole my house!" Marcus roared, a sound of pure primal agony. Before Trent could even raise his hands to defend himself, my father pulled his right arm back and punched his golden son-in-law squarely in the jaw. The sickening crack of bone against bone echoed over the shouting crowd. Trent collapsed back onto the polished wooden floor, clutching his bleeding face. My mother Valerie let out a high-pitched wail. Her legs gave out completely, and she dropped to her knees right there on the custom monogrammed dance floor. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing hysterically as the reality of her new absolute poverty washed over her. Her expensive sequined gown pooled around her on the floor, looking like a cheap theatrical costume. Dominique stood frozen beside her, staring blankly at the blood dripping from her husband's mouth, completely paralyzed by the destruction of her perfect life. Through the tall glass windows of the grand ballroom, the faint, high-pitched wail of police sirens began to echo in the distance. The authorities were approaching fast to deal with the $80,000 theft. Mr. Kensington walked back over to the stage and politely handed me my titanium black card, along with a receipt for $12. "Thank you for your business, ma'am," he said respectfully. I slipped the card back into my wallet. It was time to go. I reached behind my neck and untied the strings of the scratchy white apron, letting it fall to the floor. Then with a single swift motion, I unbuttoned the cheap polyester maid dress and let it slide completely off my shoulders. It pooled at my feet, revealing the immaculate deep emerald green Tom Ford bespoke suit I had layered underneath in the locker room. I adjusted the lapels of my tailored jacket and checked the time on my Cartier watch. The aggressive shouting of the investors and the hysterical sobbing of my parents faded into background noise. I stepped down from the stage and walked directly through the center of the chaotic ballroom. The crowd of panicked deletes immediately parted for me, stepping aside to let the dark-skinned millionaire pass. Nobody insulted me. Nobody asked me to fetch them a drink. I walked out of the heavy double doors, leaving the $80,000 disaster far behind me. The warm, humid Atlanta air hit my face as I stepped out of the service entrance. My black Maybach was idling quietly by the curb exactly where I had left it. My driver stepped out immediately and opened the heavy rear door for me. I slid into the quiet, luxurious cabin and let out a long, slow exhale. For generations, my family had worshipped at the altar of proximity to whiteness and superficial status. They believed that wealth was a public performance, and they were willing to sacrifice their own flesh and blood to keep up the illusion. They thought I was the weak link because I refused to play their toxic game. But they failed to realize that true power does not need to announce itself at a country club gala. True power is silent, methodical, and absolute. I had broken the generational curse of desperate validation. I knew exactly what my worth was, and I had built an empire with my own two hands in the dark while they were busy seeking the spotlight. The police sirens grew deafeningly loud as 3 squad cars flew past my Maybach with their lights flashing, heading straight for the ballroom. "Drive," I told my chauffeur, leaning back into the soft leather headrest. "Let them burn in the fire they built themselves." The dramatic conclusion of Kiara's story offers a profound masterclass in the dangers of performative wealth and the invincible nature of quiet competence. If there is one overarching lesson to extract from the wreckage of the Sterling family's downfall, it is that true power never needs to announce itself, while arrogant hubris is almost always the architect of its own destruction. Throughout the narrative, Kiara's family is completely blinded by superficial markers of success. They mistake designer suits, country club memberships, and proximity to perceived privilege for actual intelligence and security. Their desperate need to maintain an illusion of superiority leads them to underestimate the very person they constantly mock. Trent's downfall was not solely caused by Kiara's brilliance, it was triggered by his own blinding ego. He was so eager to feel like the smartest man in the room that he willfully ignored basic legal and financial realities, signing away his future and his in-laws' legacy just to secure a fleeting moment of public validation. In stark contrast, Kiara embodies the reality of authentic self-made success. She did not waste her energy fighting for the approval of toxic people who were committed to misunderstanding her. Instead, she built her empire in the dark, fortified by actual knowledge, legal strategy, and unshakable self-worth. When the time came, she didn't have to scream or throw tantrums to dismantle her abusers. She simply let their own unchecked greed do the heavy lifting. The story serves as a stark reminder that substance will always outlast the fragile performance of status. Step away from the exhausting need for external validation and invest your energy into building a foundation of genuine knowledge, unshakable integrity, and quiet self-respect.